Good afternoon, everybody. Hello and welcome to day 2 of Industry Week 2021. Hype, hype. Remember to get involved with our Post with the Most, hashtag IW21. And if you've got any questions during the talk, use the Q&A function to ask some questions and we'll get to them at the end of the lecture. Okay? Guys, whilst developing our esports provision at Confetti, we have pushed to connect with key esports stakeholders in the UK and abroad. It is with my pleasure to introduce the Managing Director and co-founder of Esports Insider, Sam Cooke.
Thank you very much, Jin, and thank you for having me. It is an honour to be here. I'm excited to get up to Nottingham when I can. Been stuck in London for far too long, my friend. Yeah, nice to meet you, everyone, and thanks for joining the talk. As Jin said, my name's Sam Cooke. I'm the MD and co-founder at Esports Insider. Actually, we've got a couple of slides on that, so I shall begin if I may, Jin.
Go for it, man. All yours.
Yeah. Happy days. Okay, so yes, the business side of esports. So what will I be going through today? I'll do an introduction of Esports Insider and talk you through who we are as a business, where we fit into the wider ecosystem, and I suppose our journey to date. So we're coming up to our 5th birthday now. Then we'll delve a bit more into the wider esports ecosystem, talk about the different revenue channels and how the industry is built and pieced together, and then some considerations for what is coming up next. So I imagine everybody listening here knows this one, but we'll go over it just to double check. So what exactly is esports and why should you care? So esports is just another term, right, for competitive video gaming. It's been around in some form for quite a while, but it's only in the past decade or so, and definitely more so in the past few years, that it's really grown and really exploded more like into the mainstream and has caught a lot more people's attention. Numerous tournaments selling out big arenas across games, across regions, like LATAM, for example, and SEA are 2 regions which are growing hugely in recent times, and the infrastructure to boot, obviously, within that. Some celebrity name dropping here, as everyone loves. So everyone from J-Lo to Michael Jordan is now involved in some way, shape or form, be that an investment in a team, a tournament operator, or another company within the space. So Esports Insider, who are we? So one of the co-founders, we launched it back in 2016. So we're based in London, but we have a second office up in Manchester as well. So we focus across 3 pillars. So they are events, connect, and media. So it's media for which I think we're best known still today. Esportsinsider.com is how we started life, is how we spent our first 12 months focused on just building that site. And we launched that because the way we saw it, there was very little, in the way of esports business commentary and media and understanding. It's quite, and it still is, quite a difficult space to break into and to find out about who the stakeholders are, which companies are involved, how much money is flowing through the space worldwide, what are investors investing in, what do they want to see, what are teams doing, what type of brands and companies are they partnering with. So that's ultimately why we launched esportsinsider.com. And we also now have the Esports Journal that you see there. So that is, again, esports B2B focused, but longer form content. So that's a magazine in print and digital format. So that's just longer and deeper dives into topics in and around the esports business space. We always have a cover star as well, and we've had everyone from Mike Sepso, who's a name that you'll know if you know the esports and gaming space, like launched MLG back in the day, was SVP at Acti Blizzard. I helped to write the blueprint for what is now the Wfh League. So he's now the CEO of a company called Vindex, who are making big moves in the space in terms of infrastructure. He was one of our cover stars. And another edition, we had Sergio Aguero. So it varies quite a lot. But Sergio Aguero now has his own team, of which he is CEO. But yeah, that's the Esports Journal. We have our wider media arm as well, where, of course, we have podcasts, both weekly and more irregular but deeper dive ones too. But that's our media arm. We also have events, and we did do quite a lot of events in the real world until quite recently, naturally. But we started our events at Fnatic in 2017. So at the time, Fnatic had their bunker space, which was in Shoreditch in East London, which was a store to sell their merch and their products, and the Fnatic gear, of course, and to host events as well. So we started our B2B networking events there in 2017 and hosted 4 of those back to back. Then 2018, 2019, stepped it up a gear, you could say, in terms of hosting bigger events everywhere from Twickenham Stadium to LA to New York. We had our Hall of Fame in the Natural History Museum, which was pretty weird, but really cool a couple of years ago. Obviously, last year was a tough year in terms of the events business, so we pivoted to the digital model. But events-wise, we are, of course, now looking at coming back to our big ESI London show. We're looking at options in Asia, looking at the United States again, and LATAM, as I mentioned earlier, which for anyone interested in those emerging regions, LATAM is a rapidly growing region in terms of the esports space. Like the fandom in Brazil alone is crazy, and there's a lot of companies that are going to do very well in that part of the world. So that's the events. We also have the Wfh League. So we launched season 3 of the Wfh League just last week, actually, and that is the only tournament series that we co-own and cooperate, and it's a corporate, very inverted commas, a corporate esports league. So that's companies playing companies. So last year we had everyone from Barclays through to Twitch, through to XL, who had a staff team, although they were very good, so I'm a bit suspects there. But it was cool. We raised some money for Special Effects, the charity, gaming charity based here in the UK. They do some great stuff if anyone's interested in finding out more about them. And yeah, season 3 will be this year. So spring is online only. Autumn is going to be at Platform, so an esports gaming bar restaurant in London. And then winter again is online only. So we're always looking for help with that. And if anyone's interested in that, then please do reach out. And then the last and third pillar of ESI currently is Connect. So we've got media, events, and Connect. Connect is our agency arm. So that's everything from advisory and strategy for brands, investment companies and such, and service providers, through to brokerage. So making those introductions and just helping to grow and facilitate the growth rather of the wider ecosystem. We also do some campaign activation as well. So with CSM, so CSM Sports and Entertainment, a big sports marketing company and brand activations company, they have been around for a lot longer than us and have 25 offices worldwide. So they enable us to launch those and run those global campaigns, where whilst we on our own certainly couldn't from just our London and Manchester offices and smaller team. So that's just one way that we've been able, I suppose, to fast track our growth a bit, is that partnership. And what we need from CSM is, of course, that global reach and experience working with brands at a high level and understanding how those brands spend their budgets and how those brands are used to working with partners. Whilst from their side, we, of course, offer the esports expertise day to day, the connections and such. So yeah, that's Esports Insider in a nutshell. So there's some figures about the news site itself, the views on that we get and such, and you can have a look at some of the growth, which I think is another indicator that esports isn't going anywhere, and indeed it is growing. That's again just some of our events in New York, which was lovely. Seems like a very long time ago now. And our digital events as well, which we hosted last year for the first time, and we've 3 digital events this year too. So spring, summer, and winter. Again, anyone interested in attending that, feel free to drop me a note afterwards. Here's one that I always like to include, which is who's actually involved in the esports space, right? And this is pretty outdated. I think this is from 2019. Like, so many new brands have come in since then, but even then we had the likes of Kia, of Coca-Cola, of course the betting companies, the apparel companies as well, but much more varied ones, Macy's, Walmart, Mountain Dew, of course, all getting involved, in addition to some of the big media organizations too. So everyone from Forbes, as we know, covers esports reasonably regularly. Wall Street Journal has done it a few times. The BBC now here in the UK getting involved in a big way, right? I think the BBC has now broadcast Rocket League CS. I'm not sure if the CS has been on yet, but for Blast they will be broadcasting it at least. And League of Legends as well. And it's great to see for sure these bigger media organizations getting involved in the space in different ways. ESPN, obviously, sad news recently that they've shuttered their esports arm, but I think we shouldn't be dismayed by that. Like, esports industry has its challenges for sure, but there's a lot of big media that are in it for the long haul, should we play? And there's a little video here with very buzzy flashing lights and bright music and showing you all the wonderful big events that go on worldwide. And so if anyone wants me to send this presentation to them afterwards, after we're done, then just say the word and I will shoot it over. So yeah, here we get into it. So how is the esports ecosystem broken down? And like, who are the different stakeholders? So at the very top, we've got naturally the all-important one, right? The game publishers and the developers, who hold pretty much all of the chips and a lot of the power. And that's both, I suppose, a good and bad thing. But they have different ways of approaching esports. So Riot Games, for example, or Activision Blizzard, both treat and approach esports very differently to the likes of Valve. So that obviously affects the wider ecosystem and everything else around it. So Riot Games and Acti, of course, are very keep it fairly in-house, at least with their top tier competitions. Riot do work with a lot of third parties lower down their pyramid. And indeed, I think what Riot Games have built in terms of the League of Legends global esports ecosystem is fairly incredible, to be honest with you, in terms of the regional leagues, and then the championships, and then obviously all leading up to the World League of Legends Worlds, which is an unbelievable event year on year. But they Activision Blizzard the same, or fairly similar, rather. They're obviously generally going for the city-based teams approach now in both COD and Overwatch. And we'll see how that goes. It's certainly a fascinating new approach to it. And obviously how much money is being spent and how hard they're pushing that. It's intriguing. I mean, Toronto, over in Toronto, right, there's Overactive Media, who own Toronto Ultra, Toronto Defiant, and Mad Lions as well. So the league team, and also a team in Overwatch and a team in Call of Duty, basically. And the news fairly recently, if anyone missed it, which was fascinating, is that they're building an esports and entertainment venue. And I think that and entertainment is going to be very important, because it's going to be a 7,000 seater venue in Toronto, which looks incredible and is projected to be completed by 2025. So well worth reading into that if the events and venues is something of interest to you. But yeah, getting back to it. So Activision Blizzard and Riot have the one approach of keeping it fairly in-house, of running the esports ecosystems themselves. So obviously that means that they maintain full control. They're able to more fully monetize it and make the rules and decide what goes and what doesn't. For example, bookmakers, we see bookmakers as sponsors in a lot of CSGO competitions and Dota and such as well. We don't see any bookmakers sponsoring the LEC teams because they're not allowed to. So Riot Games don't allow that. Activision Blizzard don't allow that. It's a bit confusing because it does vary sometimes criteria-wise in terms of what sponsors are allowed and what aren't when it comes to alcohol, for example. I believe that's allowed in certain regions now, but not in others. Again, very interesting to look into that from a commercial perspective. But ultimately, the point is that Riot and Activision hold all the cards and make the decisions. Then you come to Valve, where things change a fair bit. And Valve, of course, for those unaware, Valve, the company behind Dota and CSGO. Valve, I suppose, notoriously hard to. They never speak on things like this, or very, very rarely. Their I guess, somewhat more of a faceless organization. And then that's not let's say that's a bad thing in any way. They allow the esports ecosystem to be far more open, like without Valve's approach in that way, the likes of ESL, StarLadder, WePlay, Blast, etc. The list goes on in terms of the third-party tournament organizers. They would struggle hugely without if Valve were to turn around and say, actually, we're going to control all of this space and do it all ourselves. But those are the two kind of polarizing different approaches to how game publishers, devs operate and run their competitive ecosystems. So yeah, you come then, of course, the tournament organizers, the ones who've been through to the ESLs, now very much the same company as DreamHack and merged alongside them. Blast, StarLadder's One Championship. So what One are doing in esports now in Asia has been really impressive, actually, to see what was an impressive media company and martial arts tournament organizer enter the esports space in a big way. Like, the esports space is not an easy one to get into, like knowing the right people and knowing how to run these different events across different games. But One, as far as I'm aware anyway, have done a very good job in everything they've been involved in. And they're involved in one of the big Dota events coming up, for instance. So it's cool to see companies like that coming in and making that more competitive. But I would say the tournament organizers sector is already very competitive. There's a lot of CSGO events already for a reason, right? Because Valve allow more companies to run events themselves for simplicity's sake. Be a very competitive part of the industry. And then alongside that, what do you need? Of course, you need the teams. So you need the big teams playing in your competitions as well. Increasingly, teams are, I guess, holding more of the cards themselves, and that will continue, I think, to become more balanced as the TOs and the devs need certain teams because of those teams, because of the audiences and fan bases that those teams have and that those teams command. I mean, some of the oldest esports teams are like 15, less than 20 years old. So of course, that is something that will come just with time. I mean, football-wise, I'm a Charlton fan because my granddad was, right? Because my granddad was born there and he was, because his dad was, etc., etc. My mum was a fan and she used to take me as a kid. That obviously hasn't happened yet with esports teams. And so fans generally flick between them with more regularity than they do in sports, right? In sports, generally, you have your team and that's that. In esports, that's not quite the case. You maybe oftentimes you've got your favorite player, and so you'll swap when they swap to a new roster, a new team. I think that will begin to change, and like teams will begin to command more of a following, or more of a loyal, hardened following themselves, and then in turn comes monetization options for those fans, and those teams have more of a. I mean, a lot of the big teams already do, to be fair, but those teams then command more of a presence, shall we say, with all of the tournament organizers needing to have team X, Y, and Z, the Liquid, Fnatic, whoever. And that is already somewhat the case, but that will continue, I think, to be more and more of the case. Like 5-10 years ago, it was a lot easier to launch a brand new team, put it that way, and grow them very quickly than it is now. And that gap is only ever going to widen. Not to say there aren't opportunities for new teams, but it's getting harder. Streaming platforms and broadcasters, naturally, the next one is you need somewhere to watch it, right? So Twitch naturally has been the home of esports in the Western world for a long time. But YouTube gaming is now making more and more of a big play as well. It's going to be fascinating, I think, to see what happens with those two. And then in China and other parts of the world, there are other streaming platforms too. And of course, this does also incorporate the bigger broadcasters, or bigger traditionally broadcasters. We mentioned the BBC, the likes of DAZN are making moves. And this whole area and what this means in terms of media rights and exclusivity. So you can only watch one tournament here, for example, and will that come with a one-off fee, or will that come with monthly packages or annual packages? We'll see. Ultimately, the media rights landscape is definitely one that will continue to develop. It's quite alarming, I think, how low of a revenue generator it currently is for the wider ecosystem. Like, we throw these big numbers around in esports, like, oh, we're generating like over 1 billion in revenue per year now. It's like, that is so reliant on sponsorship. It's almost scary. And like, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because that sponsorship will continue to grow. But the media rights piece is so important in terms of future-proofing and creating a steady revenue stream for all the stakeholders involved, right? Because it trickles down from the tournament organizer through to the teams, through to the service providers, to the teams, and so on. Everyone's got to eat, right? So it's the media rights piece will be very interesting to see where that goes and what fans of different titles are happy to pay for. And like, there's this idea is sometimes thrown around that, like, oh, esports fans will never pay to watch content because they've always had it for free on Twitch. And it's like, one, that is such a broad brush approach that, of course, is wrong. It's difficult. It's going to be difficult to monetize these esports fans, but for creating a product that they want to pay for, that will result in more of them paying for it, quite simply. And yeah, that as the audience widens, that will of course change things. And there's people, esports fans is again very generalized term. Like the fans of different games in different regions will behave differently. But ultimately, yeah, media rights is something that we could talk to for a long while. So I'll stop. But yeah, below those three are of course the venues. We've seen some very cool venue news in the UK. Confetti and the likes of Platform with the bars that I mentioned earlier. There's the Belong by Game acquisition by Vindex. Again, I could talk to that for an hour on its own. Like, that deal that went through last year, fascinating, and like, that is huge news for esports globally. The plan for that is, so there's, I think, 25 Belong by Game stores in the United Kingdom right now. Obviously, they had a tough time recently, but each of those has its own team, right? There's the Portsmouth Pirates, there's Manchester Swarm, there's all sorts of ridiculous names that try and tie it in with the city in some way, shape, or form, and build that local community. And Belong by Game are very much going for that localization approach. And so Vindex and Sepso and his team are trying to, well, Sepso has compared it to, they plan to open 500 in the US in the next few years and 1,000 globally of these Belong stores. And he wants to localize esports properly and bring, well, I think what he calls hometown esports to towns and cities across the United States. Like, the potential power of that is huge. Like, he's made league baseball, right? That early exposure and early access to esports facilities, venues, equipment that is a blocker to general. Cool. We're back. Yeah, where were we? So on the agencies and suppliers front, yeah, I mean, there's multiple different agencies and service providers in this space, right? Everyone from production companies through to creative agencies, through to, I think the one I was about to talk through was talent management. The talent management space is one that has become a lot more competitive in recent times and will continue to be, because there's no out and out leader in Europe, NA, or Asia, to be honest with you. And that can be anything from managing broadcast talent through to managing players. So that's helping them negotiate their contracts, their brand deals, and so on, and also financial planning for their careers. Like, it's vast, the types of job in the talent management space. That's going to continue to grow, and obviously those that understand the different ecosystems the best will be generally the ones that thrive. And then, of course, holding all this up as the base is for sure the sponsors and the brands, as we'll touch on in a moment. Sponsorship wise, that is where a lot of esports revenue comes from right now, both a good, I suppose, and a bad thing as well. But yeah, brands are for sure vital to the esports ecosystem currently. So yeah, on that, some of the more active brand types, because there's plenty now, right? From automotive brands through to banks, payment processors, and so on, and the list goes on. But here are some of the more active brand types within esports by way of sponsoring teams, tournament operators, and so on. So bookmakers, as we mentioned, generally focus on CSGO for obvious reasons, and somewhat on Dota. Betting wise and betting volume in esports, at least in the Western world and in Western Europe, is very heavily CSGO focused. Like CSGO is the out and out leader by a long way. Whereas in CIS, Dota is a bit more heavy, for example. It does vary, but these bookmakers from Betway through to Unibet, Pinnacle have been offering esports odds since 2010. These bookmakers help to support the industry by sponsoring the teams and the tournament operators and such. The gaming tech and gaming peripheral brands are the obvious one, right? So everyone from Hyperx, who were bought for, I think, just shy of 500 mil the other week. So congratulations to them. Through to MSI, SteelSeries, Razer, again, the list goes on. Epos, really cool new brand that was went very much with Sennheiser, but now they're pushing the Epos brand, and they're sponsoring Blast, and they're sponsoring multiple teams and events across the space. The gaming peripherals, again, is an increasingly competitive sector for brands, or for their headsets, the keyboards and such, especially as more and more people are having their own, becoming gamers and having their own proper setups at home and spending more money on it. And then the apparel, fashion, sportswear space, Nike and Adidas, it's something of a battlefield for those two already. I think that will continue to be the case. Kappa partner with quite a few the smaller teams, shall we say. Champion got a few different partnerships on the go. Puma have done some cool stuff. And then there's the higher end, more luxury retail brands like Louis Vuitton have made some really cool moves. Gucci, what they did with Fnatic for the watch was nice, and like limited edition, but sold out, and I think they were selling for quite a pretty penny. So yeah, moving on from that a little bit, because what the brands ultimately means is revenue for the space, right? But what are the different revenue channels for stakeholders in esports? So front and center, as we've seen, as we talked about, is sponsorship. So some numbers there, and I think their new numbers are released very soon as well for this year, but from Newzoo, so an analytics company, they estimated that of the 1.1 billion projected initially for last year, 614 of that would be sponsorship. So a very sizable stake. And again, if you see the percentage growth year on year, that's grown, I think, yeah, the highest as well. Well, amongst the highest of the more notable sectors. But sponsorship is vital to this space, and that's going to continue to be the case for the next few years as we find our feet, shall we say, and as the media rights landscape determines itself, and we fully figure out what that's going to look like, what fans are comfortable with, what the rates are and fees are and such. But yeah, media rights does, of course, already come into it as a significant portion of the income. Other channels alongside that, merchandise. I mean, if you're 100 Thieves or FaZe Clan, you're doing very well on the merchandise front already. And obviously not every team is 100 Thieves or FaZe Clan, but the merch play is for sure one that is important to a lot of teams, like Team Vitality, for example, who have their store, their Vhive store in central Paris. They have their Adidas jerseys and the official jerseys and the different jerseys, but they also have one of the shop branded bomber jackets now, which I think has been selling really well. So there's definitely lots of options in the merch space. As We Are Nations, for example, is a company who have done very well as a third-party supplier in merchandise, everything from caps to the jerseys to just t-shirts, hoodies, and so on. And they partner with a lot of the big teams, including Complexity, to develop lines for them and also to run their stores and such. So that is a great example of a successful third-party service provider in esports. Other channels for esports ticketing, of course, back in the day, at least when you could do events, ticketing was vital to the likes of the ESLs, the DreamHacks, the Star Ladders, and so on. And that, I mean, that is one perfect example of why it's wrong to say the pandemic didn't hit esports hard, or that it was good for esports or whatever. For sure, it's escalated the awareness of esports and I guess the understanding of it to a wider audience, which just wouldn't have happened otherwise if sports just continued throughout last year. But we did lose out a lot in terms of not being able to host these big in real life events. Like the international, the huge Dota 2 tournament was supposed to be back in Europe for the second time ever in Stockholm. And that was going to be a huge, huge win for Stockholm as a city. That's obviously, you can imagine, in terms of hotel rooms, restaurants, local economy stuff, and all of the service providers that go into putting on an event of that size. Not to mention, obviously, TI sells out tickets-wise very, very quickly. That was a big loss, but naturally, we're all hoping that those events will come back quite soon. Other than that, there's the publisher fees, there's the streaming, there's digital marketplaces, memberships and subscriptions are something quite cool that a lot of esports teams are now trying out, should we say. Like Team Liquid have Liquid Plus. I can't remember what it costs actually, but they have Liquid Plus, their membership scheme, which gives certain fan perks, whether that's discounts or pre-buy slots for merch, things like that. I think it will be digital collectibles, etc., etc. It's still fairly new, so we're yet to see the full ins and outs of what they're going to offer. But a very cool way for a team to try to monetize its more loyal fan base, like a lot of football clubs and sports clubs do, right? And that will become more and more of a thing. And there are third-party service providers who do exactly that as well. Who they're the likes of ESPO and Blocksport, who offer that service and that platform, so teams don't have to build their own, but they're still able to use that platform to engage fans and to monetize themselves, with those third parties taking a split. I think there's going to be more and more of that in the esports space, simply because a lot of the teams don't have the resources and the wider team structure that sports clubs do. And so the issue with a lack of resources is significant, even amongst some of the biggest esports teams. So anything that can save them time but still generate them more money is generally quite interesting for them. I think there's a video here. So again, let me know if you want me to send you this one. And to be honest, the ESL DHL one is all over YouTube if you just whack those keywords in. But the ESL DHL case study is a perfect, I think the perfect case study, to be honest, of a non-endemic brand entering the esports space, to the extent that the fans were chanting, I think it was at Hamburg, were chanting DHL in the audience. And like what they did and what they created in terms of in-game content, this really cool video with the little DHL delivery bot was super cool. And like, if you know, Dota's not my game, but if you know Dota, then I think there was a lot of like in-jokes and references that really hit home. But even if you don't, it's still like a cool campaign, and it worked well. And they had that bot. They created that bot that went around at some of the big Dota events with action slacks and was giving out like DHL prizes and discounts and vouchers and God knows what. But really cool the way they have run that, and that partnership, commercial partnership between those two companies continues to this day. There's not that many. So yeah, this is the video. It's really good if you want to have a look afterwards. It goes on, but that's them chanting DHL for quite a while. But it's just a great case study of a brand that, like, who cares, right? Who delivers your stuff? Like if you use DHL or any of the others, but DHL did so well in terms of creating something of value for that fan base and showing that they were actually committed to it, and it wasn't just a logo slap, which is always said. And that's still important, right? The logo slap and the brand awareness is still important, but they went far deeper than that. And I think the way that happened is that they trusted ESL a lot, especially at the very first stage before they'd done anything. there was a lot of trust there for for ESL, sorry, to get it right, and know how to best understand the audience and how to best activate that, audience and engage that audience. Because that's, I think, one of the difficulties for big new brands entering the esports space is, we've spoken to a few in recent times ourselves, the ESI Connect. It's that lack of, I suppose maybe not lack of understanding almost, but it's that there's that fear of leaping into something that they don't fully understand, and especially the likes of CS:GO, say, there's that at least perceived brand risk that in CS:GO it's terrorists versus, I mean, call them what you want, but it's terrorists versus anti-terrorists, right? At least it was. That scares a lot of big brands for obvious reasons. I've spoken to big football clubs who have said we'll never enter CS:GO, at least certainly not under like that football club's banner. Whilst CS:GO probably is one of the best, at least for teams in Western Europe, for example, is probably one of the best games for the demographic of fans for football clubs. So it's difficult, but different brands more and more brands are coming around to it. And I think that's the trend that we're going to continue to see through this year. So yeah, these points here, so considerations for the continued commercialization of esports. So one, for sure, continued increased awareness and understanding by more and more brands globally. I think we're going to see more, like now Louis Vuitton have done some stuff. I think we're going to see more, and Gucci, we're going to see more luxury brands entering. Telcos that it mentions there is the obvious one. Like as mobile esports grows and grows, the telcos are definitely going to get more and more involved in the space. A lot of them already are, of course, but there'll be more and more of those. The fast moving consumer goods, so FMCGs, again, going to get more and more involved in a big way. Interesting one as well, not neither of those, but Shopify recently, it was relatively on the down low. Like they didn't make a big splash about it, but Shopify launched their own team with some big players as well. So Shopify Rebellion is called. And I think ultimately it's just because I think he's founder and CEO still. The founder of Shopify is just a massive StarCraft nerd. And so he just always wanted, I'm guessing, his own team. But he's now, I don't really know the StarCraft scene, but I'm told they signed some pretty good players or some reasonably big names. And again, that's like it's the team is Shopify Rebellion, and that's ultimately a brand marketing play there. So yeah, it's just fascinating that I think with esports, what brands are able to do and how creative they're able to get, unlike they are in football, basketball, and other sports, for example. You can get a lot more creative with it. It's a lot more open. Obviously, it's a lot more broad because it's multiple games which are different, popular in different regions and countries. And I guess that openness both creates the Shopify rebellions, but also creates the brands not entering because it's scary, that amount of freedom. And I think that, again, that's just something that will continue to be reduced, the fear, with more and more people understanding it, with more and more people seeing it on, oh, it was on the BBC the other day. Oh, like I was at a bar the other day and CS was on the screens, whatever. That awareness will continue to increase and reduce that brand fear. Esports to become a battleground for sportswear brands. Yeah, I mean, an obvious one, right? They've all got to wear something when they're playing. Nike, Adidas, and the like are already very involved and will continue to get more involved. The competition for media rights to grow and revenues accordingly. Yeah, this one I touched on a fair bit earlier, but that, if anyone wants to chat about more, please do so. There's plenty of sessions, panel sessions and such that I can send you that discuss that specifically. And again, that will vary game to game and region to region. Teams and tournament operators to better understand and get to know their fans and audience. I think this one's important. I think one thing that big sports clubs, football clubs especially, are good at is actually knowing their fan bases and audiences, like what they know about them. Sorry, by which I mean, like, do they have, oh, this is like Sam, I'm 29. Yeah, I have a Netflix account. Yeah, I have an Amazon Prime account. Unfortunately, I have a Disney account as well. But all the subscriptions to the different, just love TV too much. But esports teams generally, they're very good at knowing what's this can go both ways, of course, but they're generally very good at knowing what's going to hit home on Twitter. Like, that's going to be a great tweet. Like, that really is like a good meme for like the League of Legends fans to understand, or this is a good one for the CS fan base, which at the moment is basically make fun of Vitality, I think. But they're very good at that generally, and good at being creative again. And there's more freedom generally. Like, whoever runs the Man United social accounts, I imagine, is a lot less free in terms of what they're allowed to do, oftentimes because of their big corporate sponsors and also just because of the massive audience. But I imagine they're a lot more constrained as opposed to whoever runs socials for Liquid or G2 for sure, or any of the bigger esports teams. And again, like, that's both good and bad, right? Like, that can have its problems, as we've seen this week in the esports world with the past couple of weeks with TSM, for example. That can for sure be problematic, but it also means that they can be more creative, can try new things that will resonate and hit home with fans, which obviously the brands like when they get more engagement, and the sponsors like, quite simply. But just because the esports teams know their fans in terms of what's going to be popular and what's going to get a like or a retweet, that doesn't mean they know more about who that person is in terms of being able to, in essence, sell them as fans to the brands they work with. And there's a lot more companies now that are trying to do these audience analytics and assessments focused more on the esports space, because ultimately teams and TOs need to know not just how many are retweeting and sharing and engaging, but who those people are, where are they based, what do they like, what do they do. And that's very important. And that's something I think that esports teams, I mean, are well aware that they need to be better at across the board. Finally, and this is a pretty big finally, but the growth of grassroots esports, improved access and localization, venues, and the hometown esports quote that I always steal from Mike Sebso, that is super important. I cannot stress this enough in terms of how important it is for grassroots esports to continue, right? I imagine everyone listening into this session in particular probably knows this, but there's more esports societies in the UK than football, right? Like, there are UK universities. And that's huge. So that is huge. But unis is pretty late. Like, schools, everything before that is important as well, to expose kids to esports rather than just video games. And obviously that comes with simply with like parents understanding that yes, esports can be a very good thing. Actually, it can be a social thing, etc., etc. Like British Esports Association doing some very cool stuff with schools, for example. But more of that, please, and more worldwide. Like Denmark are far better and far more advanced in terms of integrating esports into the education sector there than we are here in the UK. And like that's government at the very top as a top-down thing, right? Campaigns wise, but there's so much more that can be done in terms of that grassroots esports, and that's both education and non. Like I mentioned, just having access to a local belong. Like when I was a kid growing up, I loved football and tennis. I played football a lot more, obviously because it's easy to just kick a ball around and play, but also there's a lot more of the grassroots football leagues, Sunday leagues and such. There's plenty of them. Tennis, I didn't play so much because you got to be a member of the club to play tennis, right? Like it's expensive. There's not many courts, and it's just that access that meant that I ended up playing football a lot more than tennis, to be honest with you. And I still love both sports, but esports is much the same in that, on the one hand, I suppose for the fortunate, it is incredibly accessible. You can play someone in another country. It's amazing, right? Like that part of it, but you have to have that PC at home. You have to have the PS or Xbox. You have to have a phone even good enough for some of the good mobile esports titles now. So it is in that way not accessible, even though that it could be and should be like the most accessible. But that's something that will change again, like, and with this, the hometown esports, just with more and more venues, whether that's an access to equipment and such, and societies and teams and structured leagues and a path from grassroots to pro, whether that's at schools, colleges, local venues, and a mix of all of those. Ideally, that's definitely something that I think is a huge opportunity for this industry, which ultimately wants to widen its audience, and I think that's the way to do it. But anyway, thank you very much to everyone for listening. That is me. I'm at sam@esportsinsider.com. I'm on the Twitters and LinkedIn and all of them, so feel free to drop me a message if anyone wants to chat some more. But thank you, and thank you, Jin, and to Confetti for inviting me.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sam. That was amazing. We'll obviously push into our QA panel and provide the opportunity for students to obviously ask those questions via my voice. So we'll just start off with a couple of the points that the students have asked. What is your best advice for those of us trying to break into the esports industry in general, or the media-related side of the industry?
Yeah. Just to be honest with you, just talk to people. Like the esports space generally is far younger in terms of like the people at management levels and such, and so they also, it's like the industry has come such a long way in such a short time, that generally I think people working in the industry are more receptive and at least remember their days of breaking in or trying to break into the industry much more readily. But I'd say just like don't be scared to, like Steve, our handset at Team Liquid, like Anna Bauman, who's MD at Rogue, she's lovely, like always down for a chat, and like don't be scared to reach out to these people directly. Like obviously do it in a I suppose like ask them a question they can answer. Like don't try to be specific about what your request is, and like try to be reasonable about what your request is as well. Like we get inundated with I get a fair few on LinkedIn, and like I try and reply to as many of them as I can. I'm more likely to reply if like the ask is reasonable, if someone's just asking for like a quick 15-minute call instead of an hour, or got a specific question instead of I'd love to work for ESI, like how can I do that? It's like, well, what do you do? I don't know who you are. So be specific about what, I suppose first understand what you want to do specifically, like whether that's video content or whether that's being a writer. I really need more writers always. Like we're happy to onboard student writers, for example. Jamie Wooten at Staffs was a great example. He works with us for a little bit. He's now an esports agent at AFK Creators alongside still continuing with his degree program at Staffs, right? Camilla is another one who was a student that applied and worked with us at a couple of our digital events last year. Like she's done really well, and I'm sure will do well in the industry. Don't be scared to reach out to people, but also try and be as specific as you can, and know yourself, but know what you want to do, or have an idea of what you want to do.
I think just adding to that, Sam, because another one of the questions are quite similar, and you've kind of started to answer it there, but what skills do you look for in recruits for your team specifically, or do you think would be required for working in the industry similar to yours?
Yeah. I mean, for starters, I guess it varies, right? So like on the journalists wise, that's something that we're always looking for, and it's very hard. It's been very hard for us to find good esports business journalists. And like Adam Fitch is obviously with us for a while and has since done very well. So I've gone on to Dexerto and winning awards and whatnot, and he's done brilliantly. But ultimately, it's I suppose the actual understanding first what we do, because esports business is very different. Like we don't care who's signing for Fnatic instead of G2 and rumor mill type pieces. That's not us. So I think understanding the exact role you're applying for first is vital. Like we get so many, and I've said this so many times, but it still rings true. We get so many applications that are pretty vague and are just, they'll apply for like the journalist role in Hitmarker, and Hitmarker as well. If anyone doesn't know, use Hitmarker, but they'll apply for the journalist role in Hitmarker and the events assistant role. They've applied, they just want to work in the space. Like I'm not knocking that, but be specific with like why you for the journalist role or why you for the events role. And we get so many applications that lead with, I have loved League of Legends since like 2010. Now that again, that's great, and like tell me about that on the call, but don't open with that when you're applying, because to be honest, I don't really care. Like it's lovely that you do, and that is great. But when I'm hiring specifically for a role, I need to know that it's like you understand what that role is. And if you also love the game that it connects to, that's great. But we're like, we don't care what esport we cover, right? Like we're the business side of it, so we cover across the range of them. So I think, yeah, ultimately just being honest about what they want to do and what they're able to do, I think is a very important thing and shouldn't be understated.
Great. Do you think larger traditional sports brands entering the space will be delayed due to COVID, as seen with the Schalke 04 LEC slot potentially being sold due to not being able to sell tickets?
Yeah, Schalke's a sad example, and like they said themselves, interestingly and like very transparently and honestly, I thought, which was cool by Tim Riker there, that they didn't want to sell it, and also that it was a pretty good investment, right? Like they spent X amount of millions not that many years ago on it, and it's going to sell for 20 plus 100%. Like it's a good investment in that way, but like they saw the future of it and they wanted to stay in it. It's just that traditional sports, football and such, have been hit very, very hard by COVID. Like it's the same, the knock-on effect was also seen in Copenhagen, right? With North shuttering. So they tried to find a buyer for North, the CSGO team, which FC Copenhagen had a very good stake in, and they couldn't. And so like whether that brand comes back, fingers crossed, but for the time being, they just couldn't afford to maintain it, and they couldn't find a buyer in this current climate, which is a shame. But do I think it will be a blocker? Actually, no, like somewhat the opposite. And obviously it depends in which sector we're talking. But like we had a piece recently on the site with on investment in teams specifically, and the current appetite for team investment specifically, with Dave Martin, who owns a stake in the London Royal Ravens, and with a guy called Joey Brander, who is president of First Serve, who I don't get this wrong, but they invested in Overactive Media, so who I mentioned earlier, Toronto Defiant, Ultra and Mad Lions, and another European team, which I forget, but they've since sold their stake in that team. But both of them, interviewed fully separately and independently, both said that the appetite from like their wider investor networks for teams has never been stronger. Like they've never had more investors looking to invest a decent amount of capital into esports teams than now. Like they're somewhat inundated with these inquiries actually. So I think like last year was bad for the space, but people now very much see the light at the end of the tunnel, and like the viewership numbers are increasing all the time, and awareness of it and understanding of it at a high level, at board level generally, is higher than it's ever been across brands and such. So no, I think like Schalke's a sad example for sure, but I think the appetite is still definitely there.
Sam, as we're coming close to the close of our event, I'm mindful of time. We've got a couple more questions. We'll just fire them away. So what are some of the newer employment opportunities or fields within the esports industry that people might not be aware of?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I guess the one I touched on a bit earlier, right? Like I personally think the talent management part of things has huge potential, because there hasn't really been and isn't an out-and-out leader there. Like CSA and Character Selects Agency, they have done some like fantastic work, primarily in North America, and represent a lot of the big broadcast talent. There's others like Nax who are doing some really and represent a lot of the big players in Eastern Europe, CS and Dota specifically. AFK creators represent a lot of influencers, and I think there's where that crossover comes in, right? Of esports and like gaming and influencers and streamers, and like obviously all of Twitch is an esports, or the industry would be in a very different place, but there's a lot of crossover there. Like TSM, a great example where they have their competitive teams in multiple games. They have their content, like that's one arm of the company. They have their content creators, variety streamers through to specific games, through to they've got Nakamura, if you're into your chess, like that, he's on their roster of content creators as well. So they can sell some of that viewership and such to brands alongside the competitive bit, or just that. And then thirdly, they own Blitz, the app and platform, and they've got their own separate talent management agency called Icon now. And I think that the talent management play for the esports space is very important. Like that could be anything from just focusing even on one region, one game, and pro players within that, or you can broaden it a lot to content creators and streamers. Like ultimately, obviously, focusing on what you know and what you're interested in. But the talent management side it has huge potential, because like that isn't going anywhere, right? Like brands are going to continue working with streamers more and more and more, and with teams. And being the talent manager essentially means a hard job. It essentially means, I think, well, a lot of the time being like the player's mum and dad and agent, because it means getting them to the airport on time, as well as it does reminding them that they have to mention brand XYZ in this stream, and reminding them that not to do this thing or that or the other is hard. The talent management piece, I think, is I guess an undervalued part of the sector right now, you could say, or at least underappreciated in terms of the job opportunities it will create.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, absolutely. I think as a last, or as a closing comment, sort of bit of advice for the students, if there's one piece of advice you would give the students about what they're going to be doing when entering the esports industry, irrespective of what field or what area, what would that advice be?
I would say attend, like genuinely, not just saying this obviously, but attend as many of these things as you can. And like when the real world comes back and events open up again, there are so many, like we obviously run them, but there are so many esports business and gaming and B2B networking events and such. A lot of them, like that's digital and in real life. And a lot of the time they're free to attend, especially for students, or reasonably priced to attend. And just meet as many people as you can. Like be inquisitive, ask questions, like actually go to these events and actually listen to the talks. Like I'll be honest with you, like my main strength probably through building ESI over the last few years has just been like the way in which I think we are positioned better than many in terms of our in terms of like our actual business model, which is monetized through the events and through Connect, so the agency arm. The way in which we are positioned more strongly than many is that we have esportsinsider.com. So like I have to know like the latest that's going on, right? And even though I started off as a journalist, but even though I'm not at all involved in the content side of it anymore, I still somewhat am. I'm still across it. I still know what's going out, and I know like the big headlines and the big stories, and a bit of like the behind the scenes context to maybe like why that happened. That is vital. Like it sounds absolutely soppy as anything, but like information is power, right? And like the more you know and the more informed you at least seem, the better. So it's a lot like entering the esports space, because like typically most people don't work in sports, right? They work in football or they work in tennis or whatever. Obviously some jump between, but esports is so broad and so all encompassing that it's hard. But yeah, like with us at least, I would say just staying in the know. And for me, it was in the early days, especially attending as many of the events as possible. Like the first 2 years, that's pretty much all I did, was attend the events and make sure people new, and like not hard sell it, but just make sure people knew about us and show a genuine interest in them and their businesses and what they're doing, and help people out when you can, right? And not just because you think you're going to get something from it. It's a hard space to work in, don't get me wrong, but it is very fun. Like most people work in it because they love it. Like it's generally a passion fueled industry. I certainly wouldn't still be working in it if I didn't love it as well. So it is very enjoyable, even though it is a lot of work.
Yeah, you're totally right, Sam. I think there has to be that passion, the excitement for it, and naturally that will lead to you wanting to be in and around each of the events that take place.
Exactly.
Taking notes, you've got your notepad, you're trying to absorb as much as you can.
Exactly.
And at the same time, selling yourself a little bit as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And then people just know you, they know that you're going to be at that event, or they were at that event, and that's it. It's people business like any other.
Those impressions that you make when you meet someone, if you've got business cards, if you're pressed and dressed, and all of those little things, it makes a huge difference. Sam, thank you so much. And obviously we would be listening to an applause right now, but we can just imagine the clapping and the cheering taking place right now. But thank you so much. And obviously I know all of our attendees will be really, really appreciative of everything you've gone through today. Thank you so much. Guys, real quick, so we've got a number of talks that are going to be taking place throughout today and throughout obviously the rest of the week. We've got some other esports related talks taking place on Thursday, so obviously keep your eyes peeled. Gamer is on Friday, so the big end to the week, big celebration, lots of laughs, lots of fun. And obviously you've got your game jams. There's a game jam running right now. There's a game jam starting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So if you're already signed up to it, wicked, we'll see you there. Guys, enjoy the rest of your week. And once again, thanks so much, Sam.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
All right. Bye-bye.